gentleman might feel at least that these appearances cost him no votes. But all this vanished as I learned his true character. He was devout and sincere, if ever man was. Yes, even when he records in his diary, referred to by Morley in his Life of Gladstone, that, while addressing the House of Commons on the budget for several hours with great acceptance, he was conscious of being sustained by the divine power above. Try as one may, who can deny that to one of such abounding faith, this belief in the support of the unknown power must really have proved a sustaining influence? Although it may shock others to think that any mortal being could be so bold as to imagine that the creator of the universe would concern himself about Mr. Gladstone's budget, prepared for a little speck of this little speck of earth. It seems almost sacrilegious, yet to Mr. Gladstone we know it was the reverse. A religious belief such as his had no doubt often enabled men to accomplish wonders as direct agents of God and doing his work. On the night of the Queen's Jubilee in June 1887, Mr. Blaine and I were to dine at Lord Wolverton's in Piccadilly to meet Mr. and Mrs. Gladstone. Mr. Blaine's first introduction to him. We started in a cab from the Metropole Hotel in good time, but the crowds were so dense that the cab had to be abandoned in the middle of St. James Street. Reaching the pavement, Mr. Blaine's following, I found a policeman and explained to him who my companion was, where we were going, and asked him if he could not undertake to get us there. He did so, pushing his way through the masses with all the authority of his office, and we followed. But it was 9 o'clock before we reached Lord Wolverton's. We separated after 11. Mr. Gladstone explained that he and Mrs. Gladstone had been able to reach the house by coming through Hyde Park and around the back way. They expected to get back to their residence, then in Carlton Terrace, in the same way. Mr. Blaine and I thought we should enjoy the streets and take our chances of getting back to the hotel by pushing through the crowds. We were doing this successfully and were moving slowly with the current past the Reform Club when I heard a word or two spoken by a voice close to the building on my right. I said to Mr. Blaine, "That is Mr. Gladstone's voice." He said, "It is impossible. We have just left him returning to his residence." "I don't care. I recognize voices better than faces, and I am sure that is Gladstone's." Finally, I prevailed upon him to return a few steps. We got close to the side of the house and moved back. I came to a muffled figure and whispered, "What does gravity out of its bed at midnight?" Mr. Gladstone was discovered. I told him I recognized his voice whispering to his companion. "And so," I said, "the real ruler comes out to see the illuminations prepared for the nominal ruler." He replied, "Young man, I think it is time you were in bed." We remained a few minutes with him, he being careful not to remove from his head and face the cloak that covered them. It was then past midnight, and he was 80, but boylike, after he got Mrs. Gladstone safely home, he had determined to see the show. The conversation at the dinner between Mr. Gladstone and Mr. Blaine turned upon the differences in parliamentary procedure between Britain and America. During the evening, Mr. Gladstone cross-examined Mr. Blaine very thoroughly upon the mode of procedure of the House of Representatives, of which Mr. Blaine had been the Speaker. I saw the previous question, and summary rules with us for restricting needless debate made a deep impression upon Mr. Gladstone. At intervals, the conversation took a wider range.
In
Mr.
600
Gladstone
meters,
was interested
turn
in
right
more
on
subjects
VH.
than perhaps
Garces.
any other man in Britain. When I was last with him in Scotland at Mr. Armistead's, his mind was as clear and vigorous as ever, his interest in affairs equally strong. The topic which then interested him most, and about which he plied me with questions, was the tall steel buildings in our country, of which he had been reading. What puzzled him was how it could be that the masonry of a fifth floor or sixth story was often finished before the third or fourth. This I explained, much to his satisfaction. In getting to the bottom of things, he was indefatigable. Mr. Morley, although a lord, he still remains as an author, plain John Morley. Became one of our British friends quite early as editor of the Fortnightly Review, which published my first contribution to a British periodical. The friendship has widened and deepened in our old age
In 300
until we
meters,
mutually confess
turn
we are
right.
very close friends to each other. We usually exchange short notes, sometimes long ones, on Sunday afternoons as the Spirit moves us. We are not alike, far from it. We are drawn together because opposites are mutually beneficial to each other. I am optimistic, all my ducks being swans. He is pessimistic, looking out soberly, even darkly, upon the real dangers ahead, and sometimes imagining vain things. He is inclined to see an officer in every bush. The world seems bright to me, and earth is often a real heaven. So happy I am, and so thankful to the kind fates. Morley is seldom, if ever, wild about anything. His judgment is always deliberate, and his eyes are ever seeing the spots on the sun. I told him the story of the pessimist whom nothing ever pleased, and the optimist whom nothing ever displeased, being congratulated by the angels upon their having obtained entrance to heaven. The pessimist replied, "Yes, very good place, but somehow or other this halo don't fit my head exactly."
Turn right on
The
VH.
optimist retorted by
Garces.
telling the story of a man being carried down to purgatory and the devil laying his victim up against a bank while he got a drink out of spring, temperature very high. An old friend accosted him. "Well, Jim, how's this? No remedy possible. You're a gone coon, sure." The reply came, "Hush, it might be worse." "How's that, when you are being carried down to the bottomless pit?" "Hush," pointing to his satanic majesty, "he might take a notion to make me carry him." Morley, like myself, was very fond of music, and reveled in the morning hour during which the organ was being played at Skibo. He was attracted by the oratorios, as also Arthur Balfour. I remember they got tickets together for an oratorio at the Crystal Palace. Both are sane but philosophic, and not very far apart as philosophers, I understand. But some recent productions of Balfour send him far afield speculatively, a field which Morley never attempts. He keeps his foot on the firm ground and only treads where the way is cleared. No danger of his being lost in the woods while searching for the path. Morley's most astonishing announcement of recent days was in his address to the editors of the World assembled in London. He informed them, in effect, that a few lines from Burns had done more to form and maintain the present improved political and social conditions of the people than all the millions of editorials ever written. This followed a remark that there were now and then a few written or spoken words which were in themselves events. They accomplished what they described. Tom Paine's Rights of Man was mentioned as such. Upon his arrival at Skibo, after his address, we talked it over. I referred to his tribute to Burns and his 6 lines, and he replied that he didn't need to tell me what these lines were. "No," I said, "I know them by heart." In a subsequent address, unveiling a statue of Burns in the park at Montrose, I repeated the lines I supposed he referred to, and he approved them. He and I, strange to say, had received the freedom of Montrose together years before, so we are fellow freemen. At last I induced Morley to visit us in America, and he made a tour through a great part of our country in 1904. We tried to have him meet distinguished men like himself. One day, Senator Eli called at my request, and Morley had a long interview with him. After the senator left, Morley remarked to me that he had enjoyed his companion greatly as being the most satisfactory American statesman he had yet met. He was not mistaken. For sound judgment and wide knowledge of our public